this. Okay, this. Hold on, I'm going to set the camera up here.
Never smooth.
Right again. Should be one. And okay. Now we have it. This is September 12th, 2011, and our presentation this afternoon is the nuts and bolts of the budget. Myself, Bernie Grimmie, and Director Grady Kickle will be doing this presentation today. We will be splitting this out where Grady will be doing some of the first portions of the presentation, and then I will be doing some of the following ones. We did send out handouts. Also, just a reminder that there is the CRC sign-up sheet. Feel free to make sure you sign it up, and even if you don't want the credits, it does help us keep a log of people who attended and whether you use process it or not for continuing education credits or not. It doesn't matter too much to me on that. So I do record them all and who did attend for CRCs. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn this over to Grady for his portion of the presentation.
Thanks, Bernie. I'm going to start out with the bolt, and then Bernie will give you the nuts. And when we're done, you'll have the nuts and bolt. A couple of years ago, Bernie and I had been fielding a lot of questions about the budget process, legislative process, and how it's foreign to all of the people that are working in the process and responsible for getting things done on time and getting authorizations correct. And as we looked at it, we thought that it might be important that staff have an understanding of the process. It is a very complicated process, and believe me, the states are extremely interested in accountability for taxpayers' money that's being spent. And they really do get nitpicky when it comes down to approving funding for various programs. It's something that isn't taken lightly by the governor's office or by the legislature, and this is a process that needs to go through the governor's office and then on to the legislature, and it must be approved by both. It's a 1.5 year process that is repeated every year. We actually start 1 year, 6 months before. It's the overlap of time in the approval process. So you're basically compressing 1.5 years work into a year on an annual basis. In June and July, the divisions work on the budget request, and we present the budgets internally to staff and the Secretariat. Once we get into the Secretariat, and in many ways this is an educational process. The players change all of the time. I remind my staff that in the period that I've been a state director, I have had 5 governors and 6 department secretaries to report to. Just when you think you got this process down for a 3 or 4 year period of time, there's a changeover in administration, and anytime that happens, you're back to square one. So it is a very dynamic process and changes from year to year. July and August, we respond and submit our budget that's been approved by the department to the governor's office and to the Bureau of Finance and Management. And then there are back and forth questions that go on during that entire 2-month period of time. Then in early September, which just last week, I believe it was on the 6th of September, we presented the department budget to the governor's staff and to the Bureau of Finance and Management. There will be tinkering with the request back and forth from them for the next couple of months. And then in December, as required in South Dakota codified law, the governor will present the budget address to the public and to the legislature. And it happens in December. All of these have like a second Tuesday. There is an exact date for all of these events, be a budget address, state of the state address. Interesting, last year was one of those years that we have every 4 years, and oftentimes every 8 years, if there's the incumbent is reelected, where we had Governor Rounds present a budget the second Tuesday in December, and then he was effectively done the end of December. So Governor Dugard then scheduled a budget address during the first week of legislative session in January, because you have an outgoing governor giving an address to an incoming legislature. It often happens that the Governor Rounds had to do his budget address, but then Dugard did one when he came into office. And then during session, which lasts for about 3 months, we present to the Appropriations Committee. Each department presents to the Appropriations Committee, which is made up of members of the House and Senate, and is the most labor-intensive committee in state government. The Appropriations Committee has probably 19 or 20 members on it. And it meets continually throughout session. Most other committees may meet Monday and Wednesday for 2 hours, or Tuesday and Thursday, and they'll just meet during the first couple of weeks of session. The Appropriations Committee meets day in and day out during the entire length of the session, and oftentimes is the last business before the legislature has to go home at the end of session. But they must have a budget approved by the end of legislative session. It's always a frantic few days, the last week of session, but the law says they can't leave town without having a budget in hand.
Can I add something here?
Absolutely. Please jump in.
That legislative research session, or that appropriations committee that Grady's talking about, that is listen to it through audio through the internet site. I know some staff have, and they usually send it out when our department is doing joint appropriations. And I think that other last thing of that, when they do have to agree and approve budget, I think we heard this last year where some states may not have that in their law or whatever, where they ended the session and their budget was not approved, like Minnesota and stuff like that, and caused some conflict there and stuff. So,
well, the Wisconsin Democratic senators left the state, went across the border to Illinois, holed up in a hotel, and they wouldn't come back. They basically held that state hostage. How long were those demonstrations in Wisconsin? they were into a couple of weeks at least. Yeah, there are all sorts of ploys that go on. Years ago, it was always funny if you paid attention to the South Dakota session. When it became midnight on the last day, it was a common occurrence or a routine to take a big blanket and literally take it over and put it on the clock in the house chambers, effectively stopping time until, because it would get to be midnight and they have to have it settled by midnight. So they would figuratively cover the clock until they got their differences settled, which is always comical watching time go by and stand still at the same time. Bernie mentioned the Legislative Research Committee. On the state's homepage, if you look at state agencies, there is a Legislative Research Committee link, and you can go to that link, and that is fairly comprehensive look at all the laws, administrative rules, and bills that are introduced during session. Some of you may be members of the South Dakota Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities. Shelley Pfaff and the coalition do send out a daily update during session as to the status of bills. So, and that you're not restricted from going there by any means. You will find that in this building, while we're going about our work, we might have a committee hearing on listening to what's going on in a bill. And if I'm testifying on a bill, Bernie and Rhonda have to be listening on this end, because if there's something I can't answer or something they want, the legislators, they have to be sure and get that written down so it's addressed right away. But that gives you an idea of how to follow, of how the budget goes through the legislative process. Again, both the House and the Senate have to agree to a budget that is presented to them. The governor gives them a budget at the beginning of session. By the end of session, they have to agree to it, or it has to be negotiated back and forth between the legislature and the governor's office to where there's a bill that they both agree to. And in South Dakota, there's a unique requirement that the budget has to be balanced, or it cannot move forward, which is something that the Tea Partyists nationally are trying to address. I don't know how many states have balanced budget legislation, but I think that states that do have that requirement and have had it over time are probably not suffering as much as states that don't have balanced budget requirements. A few states do their budgeting on a biannual basis, every 2 years. There's a pro to that and a con to that. The pro is the year you don't have to do it, and the con to that is the year that you have to do it. I believe that we have one of the shortest legislative sessions in the nation, 40 days, in the coldest months of the year, January, February, and March. And why don't you take a look at the LRC homepage, and you can, if you want to go in there, you can find legislation and administrative rules in the Department of Human Services, Division of Rehabilitation Services, and during session, you can click on to committee hearings and actually go to a committee hearing as it's happening. There's a committee live audio. They don't have any listed now, but they would have each committee of the House and Senate, and you just click on. This is all through public broadcasting. Once the session is over, the legislators have approved the budget, then we spend April and May loading that budget into the system for the coming year. And July 1st starts a new state budget year in South Dakota. You'll see that there are wrinkles to that as we go through this presentation. So it's a 1.5-year process that happens every year. The 2013 budget, which will begin July 1st of 2012, we actually began working on that last April and May in 2011. What you'll see at the end of the presentation, Bernie's going to do some, show you some of our budget centers. We have about 17 of them. And a budget center is like disability determination services. That's a budget center. We have a budget center for independent living. We have a budget center for district offices. All of the district offices rolled into one center. All of the wages, all of the operational costs, the rents, the electricity, etc. And our most cherished budget and our largest single budgetary category is our case service budget. It's interesting in government how money works. It's your money is worthless unless you have the authority to spend it. There's the cash versus authority argument. I've got the money, we get the money, but I can't spend it. I literally would have to go to the legislature to ask them for authority to spend money. That's what happened 3 years ago. We got an award of $1.4 million from the federal government in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, stimulus fund legislation, the $796 billion stimulus to the economy. We got the award. We could draw down the cash from the feds. However, we could not do that until the legislature authorized us and gave us the authority to spend that money. It seems a little silly, perhaps, but that's the way it works in government. There has to be a mechanism for total control of what we do in the various agencies. So we had to wait. We actually found out about it in late February, and we were able to shake enough doors to get the authority put in the budget so that we could start spending that money. That was a year when round second to the last budget, when we thought we were going under, and all of a sudden the stimulus legislation passed. This was during the last week of session. Everything was gloom and doom. Got the federal money. Next thing you knew, they passed a budget and left town. In other words, we're going to deal with it next year and start spending it this year. So the authority is the legislative permission to spend the cash that we have. And it's very specific toward what type of money it is that you can spend. It's not just authority to spend money you have. It has to be a certain type of authority based on the type of money that you have. And I think that's on the next slide, Bernie. We talk in state government about different colors of money, and that's figuratively true. It may look green, but depending on what it is, determines how you can spend it and how important it is. Not all money is the same. The first one listed, general funds, they're like gold. They are absolutely gold. That is the money that you're paying as a citizen in sales taxes, in property taxes, in cigarette taxes if you're a smoker, in all the taxes, and all, well, at the state parks, when you camp for a weekend, that's all money that is spent by us and goes into the general fund treasury for the state of South Dakota. General funds are like gold. Federal funds are often seen as fool's gold. They're critically important to agencies like us because we have very favorable match rates. In other words, if we say to the federal government says to us, South Dakota, if you will put up $1 in your special general funds, we're going to give you $4 in federal money to match it, so that you'll have $5 to spend. That's a very, very favorable match of federal dollars. And being that it's a federal program, Congress doesn't do simple things like saying the split on Title I vocational rehabilitation funds is 20%, 80%. In their infinite wisdom, years ago, they decided the split was 21.3 general funds and 78.7 federal funds. Nobody knows why, but
I think they were going to eventually go to 75-25, but they never quite got there.
I mean, that's just some of the idiosyncrasies that you have to deal with. It's a lot easier dealing with 20.2 than it is 0.21333. And the reason I say the federal funds are like fool's gold, they have conditions attached to them. All of the federal money we get is as a result of federal legislation that has requirements with that legislation. Now, I personally think that one of the most impressive, I don't want to say beautiful, I'm not that kind of a corny guy, impressive, effective, makes sense legislation is the vocational rehabilitation portion of the Rehabilitation Act amendments, which is clearly saying we're going to take public money, we're going to invest it in people with disabilities through a system of certified counselors that work with people at the worst times in their lives, when they're going through a disability, counsel them, get them training, get them into a vocational program that they can be successful with so they can be tax-paying citizens for the rest of their lives. So they can buy homes, raise families, do everything that people without disabilities are able to do. That is the most beautiful federal legislation that any Congress could have ever imagined, in my opinion. I think it's a wonderful act. It has done a lot. We all know people who have benefited from our program, who are successful. And the thing that's neat about them is sometimes they say thank you when they leave, but most of the time they're just so excited to get out there they don't even bother thanking us, but we see their success. Federal legislation comes in all forms. I told you the split with vocational rehabilitation. Disability determination services is all federal funds. Independent living is 90% federal funds. It depends on the authorizing legislation in what Congress decided. There's also another type of fund that's called Social Security reimbursement, or excuse me, other funds that are other ways of bringing money into the system that aren't general funds appropriated from the legislature, and they're not federal funds awarded by the federal government. Those are called other funds. It's kind of a catch-all category. Next one. General funds. I talked a little bit about them. We have lost a lot of general funds over the course of the last 3 years. As you know, and as all of you are experiencing, we're in an extended recession in this country. Things are a lot different than they were 3 or 4 years ago, before the housing crash, before the market crash, before the unemployment that reached nearly 10% nationally and has persisted at 9%. That has a tremendous impact on society and on government. We had several programs in the division that had general funds that were in excess of the general funds that were mandated and required in that program. And it's been a very painful process to us. We've had to eliminate or reduce some areas that we felt were very productive. We felt were making a difference. Most notably the neuromuscular program that was serving a lot of people. It was providing devices to a lot of people, but it was operationally 100% general funds from the state of South Dakota. We had $300 and some thousand in independent living in general funds. That was really nice to have. We could provide a lot of ramps, home modifications, devices to people in our independent living program. SPVI had a newsreader program. And this past year, we lost the last program that wasn't mandated by the federal government in the area of our TBI Medicaid program at Community Transition in Rapid City that we still have. And we're still serving with vocational rehabilitation monies, but we don't have access to Medicaid money, Medicaid funding for those that we can't justify for the VR portion of the program. It's been very painful. We're now down to bare bones. We are at absolutely bare bones. You see the VR 21.3, the in-service 10%, IL 10%, and Medicaid approximately 34%. As is we weren't picked on, this happened in every agency of state government. We're down to having only the general funds necessary to meet the legal requirements as match for that program within the division. And I suspect that it's going to remain that way for the foreseeable future. I can't see general funds coming back to anything in South Dakota in terms of programming until other needs are met first. I do believe that there are priorities like raises and those sorts of things that are going to be at the top of whatever the governor and the legislature discuss in the upcoming year. And I don't imagine us ever, or at least not in my working lifetime, getting back or requesting some of the general funds that we've lost for the last couple of years. So pretty astute times in government. Federal funds, the fool's gold. They're necessary. If we didn't have federal funding, if there wasn't federal legislation that required it, we wouldn't have vocational rehabilitation in South Dakota. I could not imagine in the time or in when you have to protect the population, educate the population, and take care of those who can't take care of themselves. It would be hard to expect that there would be a state that would put up all of the money for vocational rehabilitation. So, I think we should be very appreciative of that federal opportunity to for us to work with people with disabilities. The federal programs that are 100% federally funded, our disability determination services, our supported employment grant, the stimulus funds that we've had, and the Medicaid infrastructure grant. They're nice to have, but now the MIG grant is going to go away after 11 years. $550,000 a year for the last 11 years. Come the end of December, we will no longer have the Medicaid infrastructure grant in South Dakota. And we're making plans for sustainability beyond the lifetime of those federal funds. The more federal funds there are in the program, the higher percentage, the more dictatorial the federal government is. A good example of that is disability determination services. Some federal funds are matched. We've talked about this. Vocational rehabilitation is 78.7% federal. Independent living, 90% federal. Medicaid's about 67% federal. Disability determination services is 100% federal. What gets kind of frustrating when you're in administration is to try to determine what year you're working under. Depending on who asks the question, the state year starts July 1st. The state contract year starts June 1st. The federal year starts October 1st. You all know the calendar year starts January 1st. And a couple of other federal grants we have, including the MIG grant, are on a calendar year. So you are crossing over monies and programs where you're looking at funding from 4 different years on the same day sort of thing. That gets to be a little confusing. Some of the federal funding programs have requirements like maintenance of effort in the vocational rehabilitation program, in the Rehabilitation Act amendment. And maintenance of effort is something that we use to protect the money that we have in the program. A lot of states have lost programs and lost general funds. If they would cut our general funds in vocational rehabilitation any more than they've been cut already, then we would have a maintenance of effort issue. And basically what that means is you cannot spend less in general funds this year or this coming year than you spent the last 2 years prior. So that you have to show an effort to maintain the program with the general funds at least at the level they've been at for the prior 2 years. If you go under that, then you've got issues with the federal government, and if they give you a MO penalty, maintenance of effort penalty, this is the kicker. You may have done that using federal funds. You have to pay it back in state general funds. So everybody pays attention to rehab when we say we're going to have a maintenance of effort issue, and anything that somebody suggests will get retracted in a hurry if they realize the ramifications of taking money and giving us that issue. We do have some flexibility in our programs in that we have 2 years to spend the money in support of employment and vocational rehabilitation, as long as we match money by September 30th. And that was important back when we were in, for some of you that have been around for a few years, when we had to implement an order of selection. That really became important in terms of having 2 years to spend the money as long as it's matched.
Yeah, and that's why it's helpful to September, when you are authorizing for the full college year of both semesters, it is obligating the match for that second semester right away too, even though it may not all be paid out. And you know, if you have cases that are questionable, if they're going to continue second semester, you don't have to do that. But that does help us obligate some match funds that so we can show that those match dollars are there, that we can have another year to spend them.
Right, right. But that's a two-edged sword, because as we get into the year, when we get to May and June, then we got to make sure that we don't have a lot of those authorizations sitting out there, because those are basically funds that have been obligated, and if they're not going to be spent, we need to know that. We need to know that. We need to get them canceled out. So there's a Peter and Paul with everything. But yeah, with Bernie, we want to authorize as much as we can at the end of a fiscal year. Other funds. These are, up until just a year or two ago, the most significant other funding in DRS was the telecommunication relay service. This is legislation that was enacted in 1990. It was actually a year before the Americans with Disabilities Act. They passed the law in South Dakota in '89 creating the telecommunication relay service, because they knew that it was coming with the Americans with Disabilities Act. But basically what this is, it's a surcharge on every phone line of 15 cents every month in order to run the telecommunication relay service program that is the legislature placed in the Division of Rehabilitation Services over 20 years ago. That I'm always astounded. There are about 800,000 people in South Dakota. You know how many phone lines there are in South Dakota? I would think maybe a phone line and a half per person. Mm-hmm. There's 7 million phone lines in South Dakota. 7 million. That generates at 15 cents per line about $1.5 million a year that comes to the division. Well, it doesn't come to the division. It comes to the Department of Revenue for the telecommunication relay service program that we operate for individuals who are deaf, and the equipment distribution program that provides devices to individuals that are deaf for telecommunication, and the telecommunication assistive device program that provides telephone devices to people that have other speech disabilities. That is going to be well, I don't know if it's going to be challenged in terms of, this is called program income. It's money that comes to the division that isn't general funds or federal funds, but it's a result of some sort of revenue generated for whatever it is the activity that we have in the program. The cents per line charge is generated by the public in order to do the telecommunication relay service program. The Social Security reimbursement program is also called program income. And the work that we've been doing in the last couple of years has been extensive in terms of the Ticket to Work program and the reimbursement methods that we've been developing along with a couple of other states. That program income is going to become substantial in the coming years. It's really slow in developing. It's growing slowly. It's coming up. I believe it's going to be at over $200,000.
It'll be about 400,000.
400,000.
350,000 this federal year.
Now, we're going to be able to reinvest that money in programs that can get people jobs. We're going to use that money to keep some of the Medicaid infrastructure grant activities alive in South Dakota. We're going to use that money to keep the medical assistance for workers with disabilities program in existence, the benefit specialists. So we're going to be able to make use of that money. And the beauty of it is that it's income for us, and state government can't take it away from us. The law is very specific as to what Social Security reimbursement dollars can be used for, allowable expenses in the VR program, supported employment, and independent living. It's very, very specific as to what it can be used for, and if it's used for anything different by a state, it's a violation of the law. And this, I think, is going to help us in the future. It's going to help with our case services. It's going to help us to develop effective programs. And I believe our staff, you folks out there, are the absolute key to this, in that you've got to believe and continue to believe to take this forward. I'm convinced, and I think more and more of us are becoming convinced, that an individual with a significant disability is much better off staying off the entitlement program or getting off the entitlement program than spending their life on the entitlement program. $1,100 in Social Security disability benefits are not going to make you have a good, comfortable lifestyle. An effort to get an education with the backing of a rehab counselor, getting a skill, getting a profession, getting out there and making 2, 3, 4 times that money is where people are going to want to go, even though they don't know it now. It's a challenge before all of us, and we can all see the benefit that will result, but sometimes it isn't easy convincing these people that that benefit is out there for them. That's other funds. I'm going to swing it back to Bernie now, unless anybody has any questions up until this point in time, Bernie.
Does anyone have any questions on what Grady talked about so far?
I have a question.
Yep.
What funds does Project Skills come from?
That is straight federal, one VR, the 110 funds, and the schools were able to match with the schools of public funds.
So all our contribution is federal, though.
Our portion is federal.
Ours is federal.
And Grady talked about the general funds is what the state comes up with, but we're able to use certain match funds from public programs, such as the schools and Project Skills, earns probably about $400,000 a year in match. So we're able to pay all those wages and benefits out straight federal funds.
In my mind, and I sell this, Project Skills is an example of a return on investment program in the division. We invest, well, what do we invest? Minimum wage in somebody for what, 20 hours a week? A very small investment. But what does it get them? Gets them an experience in the community, gets them to say, I can work, I like going to work, I like going to the grocery store and buying whatever I'm buying with the money I make, so that we're investing a small amount so that person starts saying, I want a lot more than a little in my lifetime. I want to be a worker somewhere. That's why I think it's a wonderful program.
Any other questions out there? Because Cindy's question does lead into this next topic a little bit. Matching fund requirements, and those tie into our federal programs, and different federal programs have different matching requirements. Well, some may have, I know disability, Governor's Planning Council and Developmental Disabilities does allow staff time situation as matching when some of their small grants, but the VR funds are pretty specific that it has to be a cash match, or it has to be through a third-party arrangement that public source is providing that match, and it has to be a shared responsibility. So our contracts that we do with those schools outlines a lot of that, meeting those requirements. They have to be VR consumers, they have to be eligible, the VR counselor has to approve those services, so that's all outlined in the Project Skills program into there. Also in the past, and quite some time ago, we used to use establishment grants as a way to match some funds, and throughout the years that helped establish most of the job development programs across the state. Probably, we're talking maybe 15 some years ago, when not only we didn't have the match, but we had a hard time spending our federal funds down within a year, and then it changed to where we eventually had 2 years to spend it, so that made quite a difference. So, and one of the most critical things is we cannot use program income as match. So the Social Security funds that we receive, we'd love to use that as match. We can't. It has to be specifically something for the Voc REHAB program or something in the REHAB Act that is approved service into there. So I'm going to be flipping back and forth between sample vouchers, authorizations, to kind of help people understand how do the funds and how does the coding and how the expenditures all track on a voucher. And one fortunate thing for most people when you're doing in the VRFACE is client services, and when you select the funding source of the Aberdeen 110 funds, it's already putting in the coding for you and everything. And then Rhonda is literally moving levels of years on or off, whether it's a 2000 federal funds or 2011 funds or 2012 funds will be coming on pretty soon. So she'll be ending one source of funds and then adding another one onto there. You also have options of, you know how you pick the Project Skills funding source, and then make sure it goes all federal. When you do interpreting at universities, at public universities, remember how you are doing one authorization to just all federal, and the other portion is the match. That's probably another place that we are earning some match again, is through those public universities by their share of the interpreting. They're paying the 21.3 and we're paying the 78.7 onto there. And then our fiscal office goes back and they look at those authorizations and the payments you've done on those other general funds portion of it, and it helps us use our all federal funds onto there. So when we are working with vouchers, we need to have it by vendor number and our contract number, our company, our accounts, budget centers, our Senate user, and our state fiscal year and federal fiscal year. Those are all important information onto there. So I'm going to just kind of, I can toggle back and forth between a sample of a voucher And I'm going to use a couple I just sent out here in Excel the other day. And, okay, one I got right now, and I'm going to kind of enlarge this a little bit. And I'm going to do 125% or 100. This is to the janitorial contract in Aberdeen. And one thing I do want to mention to everyone that since Mary Neihart left, I know Mary must have been writing on there the vendor numbers, and the vendor numbers in the past used to be like the Social Security number or the tax ID number that was assigned, and because of protection of information, they didn't want to have those all together in there, so they assigned a series of vendor numbers for each vendor out there. So if you don't have the vendor number, make sure you do get that, but if you go into the VR Faces, it will plug the vendor number for you. Okay? Now contract number, because we have a contract with Automated Maintenance Systems, we have obligated out there, and I'm going to say $10,000, not sure if that's the correct amount, for this janitorial contract. And we want, if we're showing $10,000 that's obligated, and we want to code the contract number on there, because when the payments are made, it will then show that contract having less funds available out there. We ran into this situation more with medical consultants, that we established consultant contracts a year ago, like with Dr. Arnio and everything, and we were processing payments without a contract number. So then we're showing this contract obligating a certain amount of funds, and we're also showing Dr. Arnio making, spending funds, and it was holding us up on some payments that we could do out there. So it's important that if we do have contracts, that we do put the contract number in there. Now keep in mind, private providers, we do a contract with them, but we don't set a pot of money aside to them. Same thing with all the community service providers and mental health centers. It's right now what you guys are dealing with probably is janitorial type contracts and medical consultant ones that have a specific contract number onto there. Also, you see onto there where we start grouping things into a company. As the sample I have is a 1000 and a 2003. You see that alternating, and the first line is the general. We said earlier that the 1000 stands for general, 2003 is for federal. So they can run a report at any given time of showing all the state payments. That's the 1000 coding onto there. And then you get the accounts. I will get more detail on how that number or the count is made up here in a minute. And you get the center required. That is a combination of our 19 stands for a department. If it's a 197, that means it's SBVI. If it's a 195, it is DRS. And then the following numbers I'll show in a few minutes how they do break that down. And then it breaks the split out for the general federal mixture onto there. And what I have offered to some of the offices, that instead of trying to manually figure these splits out all the time, this is a good example where the highlighted field, the yellow, I simply just type in the number and the spreadsheet will do the calculation for you. Because this one is splitting out funds not only with SBVI and DRS, but SBVI is the Rehab Teacher Program has the line of coding out to there. So when we get into some samples and look at the coding more, you will see as far as how the center required numbers and account required numbers are relevant into there. I mentioned earlier that a lot of this information, when you're in VR Faces, it's just going to pull that information into there. But we do compile reports on the type of funds. And the best example I can tell you is Project Skills versus Employment Skills Program. It's very important that if this is a Project Skills case, that you are selecting the funding source of Project Skills money. Okay, and right now, and we probably need, is the 2012 Project Skills money out there? You're probably getting into where the school has started, and you started a Project Skills situation the 1st of September, and let's say that in September that Project Skills kid is going to use 50 hours of hours during September. That is in our current federal fiscal year 12. So you're going to have to do 2 authorizations showing 50 hours in 2011, and then the remaining 200 hours in federal fiscal year 2012 onto there. So it should be seamless for the client, but if they do overlap like that, we're going to need to split it in 2 authorizations. So it's important to select the right pot of money. With Employment Skills Program, I believe you don't use Project Skills, you use 110 DRS there onto there, especially for wages and benefits. Some of these types of money that you use out there is going to generate a check. Other types are not. So when you're doing 110 other, that does not generate a check. When you use 110 Aberdeen or Brookings, that does generate a check being issued out there. Okay, so that's why it's important that when you do a direct maintenance, that if we're doing it first to emergency maintenance and we're processing a check here so the individual can get it real fast, you use the correct pot of money when you do put it on the system and authorize it and stuff. And that will generate a check to the South Dakota Association of Blind to replenish that pot of money into there.
I think it just, one of the things we're trying to impress is an agency like ours does thousands and thousands of transactions every year, and every one has different funding sources, and it might be choosing this year or last year, and it's so important to get the numbers right, because to try to go back and find it, you can imagine the nightmare that it becomes in trying to track back, because once it leaves us and gets into the powers of the fiscal system, they don't call them general funds, they don't call them federal funds, they call them by these long numbers, like 1,000, and then a number behind it will signify a year or a type, and that's why a typo can take money from unintentionally take money from a completely different source. So we just need to try to be as exacting as we can be. It's not anything that anybody gets chastised for. There are honest mistakes all the time, but they can just complicate the system. So just a quick double check of stuff is very, very helpful.
Okay.
Well, another important thing is to remember, like other funds, that's going to follow the state fiscal year, and your general funds and your federal funds follow the federal fiscal year, correct, Bernie?
Yeah, there is 2 lines of years on. I'll do some examples of that here in a minute. And we do have a sheet, I sent out a sample that does pull it all together for you in those areas, but I want to take these first detailed out one by one, and I'll toggle back and forth between a sample voucher and this information. And I mentioned company earlier. Is 1,000 is general funds, 2,003 is federal funds, 3,046 is other funds, 2,000 is stimulus. And we're pretty well done with stimulus funds. We have to the end of this month to deal with stimulus funds. But let me go back to that sample voucher that we are in. And you see intercompany, it alternated between 1,000 and 2,003 because both programs, DRS and SBDI, use a combination of general and federal mixture, mostly federal, but that's where it did use those. Now, if we were using Social Security reimbursement of this, it'd have that 3,046 onto there. So, again, when you do the stuff in the VR faces, and this information is going electronically to process payments, it will bring that line of coding in as long as the correct pot of money was selected up front. Okay? Okay, let me toggle back here. The accounts. The text accounts is the next line of coding. And I'm going to break that down for you and what that string of numbers means. And there's like how many numbers are there? 9 numbers onto there. The first 4 numbers identify one of 8 categories that we deal with budget centers onto there. And I'll show you that in just a second. And the other 3 numbers identify, next 3 numbers, more of a detail of the purchase. And then the last 2 are of the state fiscal year onto there. Now, let me pull the sheet up here that I sent out. I think this is it. This is it. It's small. I'll large this up. First 4 numbers I said, when is a line of coding that happens into there, identifies by category. So when it's a 5101 series, it falls into the salaries. When it's a 5102, it involves in the benefits. And then you start seeing that travel involves into the 5203 category. And then they get detailed in what they are. And whether it's cable TV, we don't do livestock inspection or anything like that, but it brings in that coding that they may look at some point in time what is our workshop and registration fees. And probably the one that they're most scrutinizing right now is the travel for the state onto there. So that first 4 numbers again brings in that information. So 5206 is, you find it here, 5206 is past supplies. It's probably on 5206.
Right there,
it's grants and subsidies. Okay? And then you get the next 3 are more detailed on it. So 5206, 420 gets into other rehab, book rehab. That's the common ones that's brought into the authorizations. And so it will select the difference whether they're public sometimes or other vendors. So it brings in either one of those 2 of the book rehab. I think one designates public and one designates non-public is what it is onto there. But it brings that coding in for you, and the last 2 numbers deals with the state fiscal year onto there. Okay, let me get back to my little spreadsheet again. The center. The first 2 numbers are the department. 19 is Department of Human Services. The third one is Division. 5 is for Division of Rehab Services. And 7 is for Service of Blind and Visually Impaired. And the remaining numbers identify the specific budget center within the divisions. Now I sent out a, there's an SBVI budget center and a DRS budget center I sent out to everyone for information. And again, where people are probably using this is you start getting into support staff that are processing payments for their janitorial services in their building, their phone bill or whatever. And once you get them set up, you can use the same Excel spreadsheet month after month. But it's important to use the right center into there. 195001, for example, is administration, and 02 is client services. And you see how below client services, it does break into 2 categories of 110 client services or supported employment case services. So when you select a supported employment as a pot of funds, it's going to bring in that 195022 for you. Okay? Or if you just selected 110 funds, it'll bring in the other one for you.
And each, even though they're both in client services, each has different federal requirements as to how you can use them. One has a match, the other doesn't have a match. Mm-hmm. So there's whenever they get split out like that, it's because there are different rules.
Yeah. And then I'm going to take you a little bit lower on there is the DRS field offices, and SBVI has a similar structure of, I think they got it broken into 3, but that document was sent out also with this. But when I want to look at the expenditures for all the Deersfield offices in one shot, I can take it to the level of 195011. But if I want to look specifically at Sioux Falls, I add another 1 onto there. Or if I want to look at Aberdeen, I add that 2 onto there. Okay, so look at Aberdeen as 1950112. And when we go back to this authorization, that top line was, this is the Aberdeen district, and it is 1950112. Okay, SBVI's coding for the Aberdeen district office is 1970112. So then it codes that money to the Aberdeen district. Even the Pier office and the Mobidge expenditures are to the Aberdeen district office level onto there. Okay, so I want to show you how that relates back into that center required, and so they can track it back down to those office expenditures.
That would be for something like rent.
This one here is for
Where you break
janitorial
it up.
services.
Yeah, janitorial.
Yeah, and I do want to explain on this contract here, or this payment, because we have, they broke it out by the number of staff position in that office. In the Aberdeen office facility where the janitorial service is, 75% of those people were Division of Rehab Services. I think it's 8 point something was SBVI 110 funds, and then the other was SBVI Chapter 2, which is rehab teachers. So they're each paying an equal percent onto there. So back to the PowerPoint.
Not equal, it's prorated to.
Yeah,
the
it's
number of
prorated
staff.
based upon a number of people in there.
We all pay the same rate, it's just breaking it out by,
Yeah. The center user, again, most of the time this will bring in the coding for you, but if you are manually doing it, you'll need to know these center user numbers. 142 means for VR funds. So at any given time, they can run a report, show me all the payments on the vocational rehabilitation funds. And they can do that by this level of coding into there. 129 is disability termination. 764 is program income. 144 was Tech Act. 235 was MIG. The other numbers were the Medicaid programs. And one thing I will show here a little bit later, in case services, they did add another number to signify whether the type of service within the VR program, whether it's assessment or it is maintenance, or there's like 13 different categories, and that was used for one of our federal reporting. Again, the only time that's used is in client services, and the VR Faces pulls it in for you when you select the right service onto there. One thing I'm probably, let me see I do want to show you that sheet here before I get into this. Okay, that center user for this example, I don't have a 4th and 5th number onto there, but I sent out a copy of a sheet. I'm going to find it out here. Here's my directory. The coding structure, and this one is for rehab services. And we do send this out when there are updates. And this is kind of putting together a lot of that information for you on those authorizations. That the first one we're looking at is what is probably the administration line of coding. And we're going to look at let's look at the blue to start with, and you see that was stimulus, and so the company was 2000, and the account was started with a 52R, and then the 4 numbers in between there, you had to look more specific at the sheet at the type of vendor there is onto there, and or not type of vendor, but the type of what it is for, if it's paying for brochures, or if it's paying for actual client services, whatever. That was a 2-page is it this one? No. Yeah, I'll have to go back to it and bring it up. That was a 2-page document, right here it is, that, started from the salaries, 5101, 5102 with benefits. You would have to get those 4 blank numbers in there off of this detailed sheet, because you may be paying for cable TV or whatever. So, the center, like I said earlier, when you look at the budget centers, the 19501 is for administration. And it does show you the split of funds and how much is federal, and then how much is stimulus. And that was the federal fiscal year 09. Now, if you go up a couple, you'll see the federal fiscal year 2011, which we're currently probably dealing with for not for client services, but also our main expenditures of funds. And is a 2011 right now, and how it has a 78.7 and a 21.3 split onto there. And when you get these a little lower, what you start seeing is like client services. That top line of the 1,000 has been crossed out, but the 2003 of federal is still there. Basically, our match has been paid out for federal fiscal year 2010, and that was over a year ago. But federal funds have a 2-year carryover, so we still are spending some of our federal funds of our 2010. And we can no longer authorize them anymore until the end of September, and then we have another 3 months to get the payments issued onto there. This is usually the time of the year that I'll send out a list of authorizations to our staff and say that, the 2010s have been completely used up. If you had no payments on them, I can switch them over, but if you had payments on them, I have to cancel them out. Because if I tried switching them, then it's going to switch previous funds onto there. So you have to cancel those out and reissue any unpaid balance. So I'll kind of do that sometimes with support employment or 110 funds onto there. But what I was talking about earlier was on that center user, where it has 142, where that is, it's voc rehab funds. It has another digit 4 and 5 on there. 01 stands for assessment. 02 stands for restoration. 03 stands for college, university, and it goes down the list. There's like 13 of those, and that was put in there for one of our federal reports. It's called an RSA-2, and they want to know how much we spent on post-secondary, how much we spent on business vocational, how much we spent on on-the-job training. So this is already coded in the VR Faces. On each service has one of those coding numbers behind it, and it brings it with it then. And see, this document goes all the way into, now we're into 2011 funds. We do have enough general and federal into there. So again, this document is usually sent out to the field offices. So when you do an authorization, you can get almost all your information right off of this. But it's helpful for people to understand how is that center number composed of, how is that company number composed of, and where does that come from onto there. And that was those other documents I was talking about into there. Get so many different screens brought up here. A little bit about the budget and what it looks like. We break it into those budget centers, and our administration has a set of money, our client services, our field offices has a set of money. But before we even get to all of that, we do get into a mission statement. And what is our mission or purpose of Division of Rehab Services? We do get into performance indicators that is provided to legislators. We do talk about the revenues, how much we're anticipating for Social Security funds, how much we're anticipating for our relay service funds, how much we're anticipating for the VR funds. We're breaking out all those revenues also into there. When we are working on the budget, we do look at what is the total of each categories, and we call them the rolling budget reports. I didn't send those out, but I can send out some sample narratives. Or another good source of our budget, if you'd like to see it, is when you go to the state webpage. you can see more of the budget summary situation. You won't see it for the detail of the Sioux Falls office, but you will see it for more of the division as a whole into there. And you'll see how many FTE and how much federal dollars and how much general funds and how much other funds are all involved into there. Couple of things to note for consideration on the budget is we can't always move funds around to certain categories. We can't move it around from personnel service all the time to operation or vice versa. I think sometimes there is, but it's not at our level onto there. We can at times move, when we're doing an upload, our budget is approved a certain amount, move it easily from Sioux Falls office to Aberdeen office or whatever, especially if rents are changed, or some years ago we did some restructuring of offices. You know, we're able to move the rents around from one location to the next. Or a couple years ago, we discontinued our some of our contracts we had with the mental health centers, and those changed over into client services. Well, then we needed to move the money out of the grants and contracts category, and then we moved them into client services onto there. So we do move some of those funds around in our budget. Another important factor is the number of positions we have. The FTE, the full-time equivalents, is determined by the legislators. Even if the funds are available for us to hire more people, the number of positions we have are capped or limited out there. With the state funds, this is the match. We have to the end of June to use it or basically lose it onto there. I think there's probably been some considerations of some carryover, but typically we try to spend down our state fund portion of it. That's why you will see the emails come out from Rhonda and myself probably starting in April, May. These are open authorizations. And, you know, will the bills be paid onto these? And if they are, let's get them paid now. And so we try to get as many payments done and cleared out, you know, before July 1st. So you can always remember that June 30th, that's where we want to get payments done on the state fiscal year. When we run into our federal fiscal year, we're trying to get authorizations in place because it does obligate the match portion of it, that we're able to show that we have these authorizations out there, they're matched, and then we can carry those federal funds over for another year. I'll talk about reallotment in just a minute here, but you got to keep those two different cycles in place, and it's very important that offices, when we are dealing with that end of state year, that they're getting those cleaned up onto there. And I know some offices are historically very good on those open authorizations, that the cases are closed or the authorizations have expired, that they're getting those cleaned up onto there.
And usually around mid-June, Ellen's sending out an email saying you need to have these payments in for me to process by a certain date, because there's like a two-week period there where she's not processing any payments.
The state, we send out a letter to vendors, remember, also that to get their payments in as early as they can, because the state system does shut down. So if you don't get it in time, you're going to have to wait about 2 weeks longer for your payment onto there. So
I just want to reinforce that. It's the way this budget cycle works. There's no forgiveness on the state side in terms of June 30th, and that's why we ask you to clean up authorizations, to get out there, to find out, because really you get double whammied. We're very much interested in going into a fiscal year having enough reserve, if you will, in case services for unforeseen events. Sometimes there might be some high-cost items, like some conversions, that just a few of them can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they may be legitimate. But what you can't afford to do is go into a year spending a federal allotment that's set aside for you for the next year. You can see the danger in that, because then if your expenditures are up during the year, then you finish out that year and you're borrowing more forward into the following year. And inevitably what happens with that is you end up having to do that god-awful order of selection, which is a pain in the butt for all of us. So when this June 30th is such a magic date, because I think you understand the concept of use it or lose it. If it's sitting out there and it's not going to be used, then we need to get it so we can use it elsewhere. Similarly, if it's sitting out there and gets crossed over into the next year as an obligation on July 1st, you still have the obligation, but the general fund match on that disappears because they take it away. And if that's still an obligation from one day to the next, you in effect lose the 20% here, and the next day have to turn around and take 20% of your next year's money to cover that. So
Yeah.
it actually gets you twice. And so
You'll see us when we have trainings. We had the was it not Alan Anderson, Liz Fabiano training in late May or something like that. We made sure we got those travel reimbursements processed in that state year, and the motel paid in that state year and stuff. So, because we knew the next year would be tight for travel. So, and that's kind of like one example on there is get that paid out then. I think another example is we'll probably we do a lot of our computer purchases right around middle of June. We always have the list kind of sitting there ready to go what we need for a replacement, but some of it's going to depend on how much of the available state funds we still have, and then we'll make the order and the payment gets processed on that state year, even though it may be September when you finally do get the computers. It's when the check's issued on
Now,
there.
are these are state dollars, general state dollars?
State,
We're
yeah.
not talking federal.
No, I'm
because
talking
federal's
state.
in a different cycle,
Yeah.
and that can carry into the
So-
next year. Okay.
So that's very important when, and so we're not just doing it to be sticklers. There's a real value in making sure that if that money is going to be used, we turn around and use it someplace else. Like this past year, we were fortunate to have some general funds left over that we weren't going to spend, and we were able to buy 150 ramps from Springfield, the pre-made ramps that can be used in the VR program and the IL program throughout the course of the coming year, and they're already paid for. They're ramps that we would have never had access to had we not been able to get them right at year end. But I just want to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. We've been talking about budget. We have about a $20 million budget in the Division of Rehabilitation Services, $20 or $21 million. About $4 million of that is for the Assistive Daily Living Services Program, the Attendant Care Program. About $4 million of that is for Disability Determination Services. About $1.5 million is for the Telecommunication Relay Service. And the remainder, or about $10 million, is for the VR program. And I just want to state this very clearly. The VR program has two components to it. There's the case service program, which is about $5.5 million, is the money we use to purchase services for consumers, be it tuition, maintenance, training, and about $4.5 million is for the personnel and operations in the division. And the reason I want you to, the value of the rehab program is $10 million. We don't charge for counseling and guidance. We provide that as a service. We don't charge for assessment. We provide that as a service from from a group of trained individuals, be it the support staff, the counselor aid staff, or the work of the counselors. There's value to that, and when we report our expenditures, we report those as operational costs. We have one of the lowest administrative cost components or percentage of any state agency in the nation. We're pretty bare bones at the top, because we want to devote as much of our money as we can to case services. And case services means the 40 hours a week that each of you as counselors and support staff and counselor aides are working, because that counseling service is a very, very important component of the case service program.
Okay. I just want to review a couple of things here, some other samples for take on the last topic, reallotment. I did show example of this one janitorial contract we did splitting out. And these examples are real ones being done or some recent ones. I got to change this to 140%. This is a payment I recently did for pins. Okay, the company line 2000. I used all
Pins you pin on, or
pins,
you
writing
write
pins.
with?
Ordered a lot of money in pins. Ordered 11,000 pins recently that each district will have with some vocational rehabilitation and their phone number on it, and then some sub offices such as Watertown and Pierre will also have some too. But you can see the line of coding, the account required 52R44, and all that in the center. You can see right down the first one's Sioux Falls. I think the next one's Aberdeen. If you look at that coding structure, you identify those offices. I think the last one is Yankton onto there. 142 is vocational rehabilitation, and how much money is on each one. So you're pulling those out of those coding structures of.
Leave that there for.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna, okay, go ahead. Let me go back here.
I just want to point out that 52R, that's stimulus funds, correct?
Yep, that's when I pull up the sheet here
Okay.
of Aberdeen district offices, or all those offices. Here's Sioux Falls. You can see we're at 52R. And the next four numbers were based upon the type of item that it is. And you see 11 is Sioux Falls, Aberdeen's 12, Rapid City's 13, you know, the Brookings is 14. See, this is where we get the coding structure onto there. And what is those other four numbers I used were, let me find my spreadsheet again, 44. Instead of R.
Advertising.
Yeah,
miscellaneous.
advertising miscellaneous is what it came down to. So they can look at how much was spent in advertisement, regardless of the type of funds, and then, but this breaks it down into each office onto there.
I want to make a point. Leave that up there.
Oh, sure.
Would we have purchased $3,895 worth of pens out of our vocational rehabilitation 110 funds? I don't know that we would have, unless we can see a value coming back to us. But the 52R is the stimulus funds, where we're now looking at a clock that's ticking, and in the next 2 weeks, we have to have all of those remaining stimulus funds obligated, or we lose them. Mm-hmm. So that's why we decided that we would purchase these as a way of trying to spread some knowledge about our program across the state, have our counselors be able to give people pens.
Well, especially employers and stuff like that.
Employers.
And, you know,
But it all depends on what kind of money it is,
yeah.
what the strings are to it. If we felt that we needed it for case services, would we have spent it on this? Absolutely not.
Now, I'm going to show another example here. This was in Jerry's Raby's office. I just processed this payment here recently. I'm going to make it a little larger. And Jerry got some books. So this 1950114 is the Brookings District. We used the combination of the general federal, it's using 110 funds. Now, if you look at 520445, where's your little handy dandy sheet? Is manual 52445. 44 manual cost. We put it as manual cost. The closer we can get onto there. So, and 01 is the state fiscal year of 11. We're currently in it there. So.
Is there a way? How do you know what
Or
these,
you-
some of these things mean? I would have no idea what manual costs are, or
As a manual.
some of these other.
Book, a manual.
Oh,
You know,
You got to figure these out. You got to figure these out.
So, I mean, you had to get close onto there as you could. So, and then it does the split. And again, I did this spreadsheet where I just put in the $200 and it did the calculation. So if you've got secretaries that are trying to do the calculations all the time, you know, give us a call. We'll do the worksheet. And all I gotta do is plug in a dollar amount and it'll do the calculation and split for you onto there. It's probably something we may want to do as a sports staff training to do a little basic Excel, you know, statements into there. They're not that hard into there. So, let me finish up the PowerPoint here. Reallotment is something we deal with once. Now it's kind of been twice a year. And it's been around for quite some time. And what it is each year our federal agency, the Rehabilitation Service Administration, they send us out a letter, email, and they're asking the VR agencies in August as to whether or not they're going to use up all of their funds. And if they're requesting additional funds, and if they're not going to use up all their funds, how much would they give up? And some states have historically given up their federal funds. I'm going to say Wyoming, for example, that they weren't always fully matched or didn't have a use for that, and they would give up some of their funds. And now what's happening is other states that are in a much worse financial situation don't have that state match. And if you don't have the state match, you can't use the federal match. And if you don't have a way of the third-party arrangement like Project Skills or whatever, you know, you haven't earned that match, you can't use those federal dollars. And so they are letting a large amount of these federal funds back. And then the other states can ask for that. South Dakota has never given up any federal funds, and historically sometimes we've asked for additional federal funds, but it always depends on our matchability into there. So I did look back, and in 2010, the VR agencies relinquished about $127 million, and this was a record for them. But what recently came out for our federal fiscal year 2011, which will be ending in about 2 weeks, it's showing about $160 million has been relinquished. And some states have gone in and asked for some of that, and so some of that is still sitting out there right now. But the thing is, states need to remember onto this. If they go out and they ask for a lot more that increase their match requirement, then they just increase their maintenance of effort requirement. And then that's going to be held out there against them 2 years from again in the future. So if they were to double their federal amount of funds, that means their match would have to be available to double. And not only in this year, but 2 years from now when they have that maintenance of effort issue onto there. So, and if they don't, then they got to pay it back with state funds. So they got to know what they're doing onto the reallotment. So this time I just want to turn it back over to questions to see what people may have for questions out there. On the budget, what I'll do is when I get done, I'll send the link to where the budget is out on the state website. You'll see it more as a summary or detail level onto there. But questions will go around this point in time. Watertown, you guys are on the line. Ask you guys first. Have any questions?
No
Okay.
questions.
Yankton, do you have any questions?
No questions.
No questions in Yankton.
Okay. Spearfish?
Yeah, I had one quick question. I've always been confused when we go to authorize whether to use 110 funds or supported employment for situations such as the mental health outcome or contract services or the employment skills program. I mean, I hear you can use either one, and I'm wondering, well, what's the difference, and shouldn't we be using supported, or doesn't it matter, or what?
Of course, support employment is if it's a support employment case. You want to make sure it's a support employment case because there are requirements what that makes up to that. And yeah, if you're using it for the mental health outcome contract, you can use support employment funds onto there. Or if you're doing it for job placement or job coaching, that has been historically the services we do it with, and for the provider services. What happens is we only have $296,000 of the support employment funds, and we spend $600,000. So what happens when we get the $296,000 spent, it'll either go into our next year's or it'll go into our using 110 funds. So if you did an authorization and you say, oh, I used 110 funds, I should have used support employment funds, don't go back and change it. Just leave it on there because we're using plenty of our support employment funds anyway. And once they're done, it just goes into 110. Does that make sense, Mary?
Okay, so, yeah, is supported employment federal money then?
Yes, that's all federal, and our 110 is 78.7% federal.
So should we go ahead and use the supported employment funds when it looks like it's, justified, and then you will let us know when they're gone, and then we switch over? I mean, I never know what to do.
Tell you when it's gone to switch over. It'll just happen here behind the scenes. And
Oh, okay.
just if you're doing the authorization, you know the support employment case, just use support employment funds. Okay?
Okay.
And like I said, but if you already did it, don't go back and start changing a bunch of old ones you've already done, because we spend more on there than we really have, and we just use 110 anyway on the remaining difference.
Okay. All
Okay.
right, thank you.
That's a good question.
It is.
Good advice. The important thing to remember, if it's a legitimate supported employment case, then by all means, authorize using supported employment funds, and you never have to worry about it again because we'll take care of it on our end.
Yeah. The Sioux Falls, whether it's Rehab Center or the district office, you guys have any questions?
We don't have any questions at the district office.
Okay. Rehab Center? Okay, no questions, I guess. Rapid City?
No questions.
Okay. Any from here and Pier? Mary and Mulbridge?
I don't have any questions right now, but I'm sure I will.
Okay. Okay, Brendan Mitchell?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Carmen and Huron?
No, no questions.
Steve and Chamberlain?
None here.
Jerry and Brookings?
No questions about the presentation. We were wondering when the pins might be available, if they'd be available for our events in October.
I'm sure hoping they will be. I just checked this morning. They will not process the pins until they got the money in their hand. And the check has not been processed out yet. So, yeah, it's going to be cutting it close for the ones at the beginning of the events. I also use stimulus funds for table covers. And the last word I had on that, they will be in on Wednesday, and then I have to prove, they're just going to say Division of Rehab Services on there. They got 6 of them, one for each district and one for Pierre. So those we hopefully shall have out to the offices before October, but the pins, it's just getting that money first.
Jerry, what do you want to do? Give away 750 pens in one day?
That's the idea, yeah.
Okay. Aberdeen.
We are good here and no questions.
Well, if there's no further questions, that does conclude our presentation here today. I do want to thank you for taking the time. And again, like I said, we're hoping to have this up on a website where people who were not able to attend it can access it later on and stuff like that. So other than that, that concludes it. So you guys have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Make sure you mute your system before you're done, because the system will stay on for another 5 minutes. Bye, guys.